Hello, friends. I'm Laverne Friesen, and this is True Emotion Dad, the podcast where we dive deep into real life stories, healing journeys, and the powerful lessons we've learned along the way. We explore all aspects of mental health, trauma, healing, and spirituality, but we don't shy away from the darker sides of our experiences. By sharing the raw and unfiltered truth, we aim to educate, inspire, and sometimes even offer a cautionary tale. I'm so glad you're joining me as we navigate this wild ride called life. Isn't it great? Let's get into it. I want to dive right in and share my story, the real, unfiltered truth, because I know that talking about this stuff might just save a life. I went through a prolonged mental health crisis. I was depressed. I was anxious. I was hypervigilant. I was hostile. And I was terrified to talk about it. I didn't think men were allowed to talk about stuff like that. I thought I'd be judged, seen as weak, and so I stayed silent. The stigma around mental health almost killed me. And we're going to talk about that a lot more in the coming episodes. That's why I'm here, speaking up, but not just for myself, but for the 5 men I knew who died from suicide. I'll tell you right now, it's not always what you think that drives someone to that point. Those 5 men were all rising stars, high performers, until they weren't. And one of them was a really good friend. To really understand where I'm coming from, you need to know who I was before I became who I am today. I grew up on a farm in northern Alberta, Canada. My parents were, and still are, part of a fundamental religious group, a closed society. Many would call it a cult. Many wouldn't. And when I say many wouldn't, I mean those still inside that organization. Technically, they don't fit the textbook definition of a cult. There is no single charismatic leader. But my experience, it was absolutely a highly controlling environment. I thought my childhood was normal until I was about 4 or 5. That's when I started questioning everything. Like, why couldn't we have Christmas trees or lights? We celebrated Christmas and we believed in God, so why not decorate? Even then, the answers never made sense to me. Then, when I was about 5, a police car sped past our farm with its lights flashing and siren blaring. A highly unusual event, and I was scared. I ran inside to my mom and she told me not to worry. The officer was on his way to help someone. In that moment, I decided I wanted to be a police officer. But my mom shut it down immediately. According to the church's doctrine of non resistance, I couldn't. I might have to use force or carry a gun. And that went against their beliefs. But to me, that didn't add up. I believed that God, or the universe, source energy, our creator, whatever name you use, sends helpers like police officers, doctors, firefighters, and regular people. I know not everyone feels this way, and I respect that. But for me, I've always believed that true non-resistance is about going with the flow of life, not about standing by when others need protection. For it's when you watch that great evil happens. Then the unthinkable happened. I was sexually abused, and the church protected my abuser. I remember asking, "Isn't this illegal? Shouldn't we call the police?" And the answer I got was this: the church handles these matters. But they didn't. They never did. And that person went on to abuse many more people. But there's a surprising twist in my story. One that I discovered 38 years after that sexual abuse. I guess you'll have to stay tuned to hear about that. I experienced a lot of violence as a child. Emotional, physical, sexual, religious, spiritual, and financial abuse. And there might even be some abuse that I haven't heard about that I experienced. Who knows? Some of it might not look like abuse, especially to those within that culture. But it was. It took me years to recognize the financial abuse, only realizing it during sessions with my psychologist while unpacking a long-term relationship and my childhood. I never felt safe, physically or emotionally. I was abandoned both literally and emotionally. I was left vulnerable, which left a deep, deep wound within me. A wound that led me to start abandoning myself. Despite all of that, I had known since that I was 5 that I wouldn't join that religious organization. I had decided that in a fit of childhood anger after being screamed at by a parent. I could already see the inconsistencies between what they preached and the behavior that I witnessed daily. Now, I believe that deep down, my soul always knew I was meant for more. From a spiritual perspective, I needed that abuse to learn lessons later in life. And in 16 short years within that community, I got more than enough to last a lifetime. Traumatic experiences that I didn't address until I was almost 40 years old. I had been living a lie the whole time. I knew that I was going to leave that community, and I knew that I was going to pursue a career in law enforcement from an early age. Looking back, that's why I believe why honesty, integrity, authenticity is such an integral part of my life. I never witnessed it as a child. Additionally, I had to continuously lie to save myself from beatings. Punishment that was handed out to me simply for being a child. I finally achieved my dream of working in law enforcement at the age of 27, and I loved it. I was working on highway patrol and volunteering as a firefighter. Life was good. Then I got into a relationship that drained me, although I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't know what love was supposed to look like. I didn't know what red flags were. And trust me, we're going to talk a lot about those on this podcast. I've written a manuscript on toxic relationships and I'll draw on that often. There is so much to unpack there. I had kids. My mental health declined. And eventually, I felt betrayed and abandoned by everyone in my life. Everyone that I hadn't already been isolated from. We're going to dig into that too, because that experience was life-changing. It shaped who I am today. My healing journey really began when that relationship ended. I went down countless rabbit holes of self-discovery and growth. And you know what? That's exactly what should happen when life throws you a curveball. If you don't dive into healing, you're just repeating old patterns. You're not breaking generational trauma. And let's be real, we all have some generational trauma, whether we think we do or not. Eventually, my law enforcement career ended. My psychologist told me it was time for me to find a happier job. Go figure. That was a huge adjustment. But during that time, I experienced my first real taste of what support could look like. At age 42, I had never been supported in my life until then. Fast forward a couple of years, and I experienced heartbreak from the first person who had ever showed me what safety and love look like. It was a profound love, at least by society's standards. And we'll get really deep into those later. That breakup rocked me, but it also sparked some of the deepest inner child healing I've ever done. You're going to hear a lot about inner child healing on this show. It's my favorite topic. Stories from myself and my closest friends. After all, your story of how you healed and overcame adversity could be someone else's guide to recovery. Even when you think that you've dealt with your biggest trauma, life has a way of showing you there's still a lot more to heal. Oh my. Yes, yes. There are so many layers to healing. And now, here I am, recording my first ever podcast episode. I'm happy. I'm in the flow. And I'm non-resistant to life's external forces. I'm so excited for you to join me on this journey. It's going to be therapeutic. It's going to be cathartic. And it's absolutely going to be a learning experience for both of us. If this podcast is healing for me, I hope it will be for you too. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. As always, much love, Laverne.